Good afternoon. We are so excited to be here with you today. The case rolling into the future was a really exciting way for us to become more familiar with BNSF. And we're excited to share the insights that we gained through our analysis with you. We're Team Raising Canes. I want to introduce you to my colleagues. We have Marcus Cortez, Alex Larson, Scott Jackson, and myself, Lillian Barton, on the call today. So as far as our agenda is concerned, I just want to call out a couple of things. We'll be going over recommendations, digging into our analysis, and then also giving you a full implementation plan that will be comprehensive for the entire presentation. So when we first got the case, we took some time to really try to dig into what exactly was going on. We did an Ishikawa diagram, we dug into the 5 whys, and we also did a number of used a number of strategy tools looking kind of into Porter's 5 forces, past analyses of our industries, and we realized a couple of things. One is that BNSF has some very strong core competencies. The intermodal rail transportation, being first movers when it comes to a lot of technological innovation, and really being the industry leaders for railways. As such, we're excited to say that we came up with some recommendations that will be able to grow your revenue streams. Our best case scenario had a 10-year NPV of about 100 million, and we saw gross profit margins in the range of the railway industry and BNSF's business overall. So in our strategy alignment, we dug specifically into an industry evaluation looking into profitable industries, specifically looking at size and growth rate, as those are fairly good economic indicators of revenue possibilities. Additionally, we know that BNSF is really committed to sustainability, and we were thinking about that as we looked at the different geographic locations of our recommendations. We also looked at, sustainability practices for these logistics centers. And moving into the technological sphere, we were also looking for really important and key technological tools that will improve BNSF's product offering to its customers. As such, this set us up to find our 3 recommendations. Specifically, we recommend that you begin by building a logistics center in San Marcos, Texas. We also had 2 other logistics centers with profitable NPVs that we would recommend you move forward with, specifically Kennewick, Washington, and Alabama. And we'll go into more detail with those going forward. Additionally, with prioritizing renewables, we were thinking about that specifically with the Texas and the Washington sites. We know there's a lot of strategic alignment for BNSF in this area, and we know that you're committed to investing in this industry. Additionally, we want to suggest that you invest in AI and other tools in the Internet of Things, specifically drones, and we'll go into that in our analysis as well. So initially, as we were looking at the industries, as I mentioned, we used Porter's 5 forces, we used pest analysis, and we also looked at the overall attractiveness of these industries. I want to call your attention specifically to the residential industry. There you can see it's a highly attractive industry. It's worth about $1.1 trillion. And additionally, it has a good level of annual growth at about 8%. As such, it got the highest rating in terms of our initial industry weights that fed into our revenue tool. Additionally, we noticed that though clean energy is a much smaller sector than residential, it's also really growing, and that 10% rate was the highest of all of the different industry growth rates that we saw.
before we could dive into applying those industry weights across the different logistics centers, potential logistics centers that we analyzed, we had to better understand each industry and the metrics that were needed in order to determine which logistics center was best in these industries. And so we developed industry scorecards using the ESRI tools that we had been given to provide certain parameters and weights that we could develop in each of these areas. We also, for each of these industries, included a weight for the 150-mile radius versus the 300-mile radius so that we could weight the 150-mile core of the logistics center heavier than the outer 300-mile radius. I'll bring your attention to some of the things that we did with the residential analysis, analyzing a combination of the population growth rate, the housing growth rate, and also then looking at the market size across the comparatively versus and the against the different logistics center locations. Another one I'd like to highlight is the clean energy, where we looked at untapped solar, but we filtered down to only the most promotable lands that are available and untapped in the solar area, and then combining that against weights also given to areas of significant wind power. And these were just some of the ways that we looked at using the ESRI tools to find data, develop a scorecard that we could then weight the different locations and determine which ones we wanted to pursue further. And in doing so, we initially identified three locations to pursue, and those were Texas, Washington, and California. Those came the highest of our scorecard. But then we took the analysis further into the financial analysis. And you'll notice I hadn't mentioned Alabama. When we did the financial analysis, we found that the Alabama location actually was much more financially beneficial than the California location. And the other interesting thing is that these were the only four profitable potential logistics centers in our analysis. The other six potential locations all had negative net present values and weren't profitable in the analysis. Something else that we learned at this point and investigated further was the industries of each location and which industries that we would want to focus on in these specific locations. As we mentioned, the high growth rate of residential, this is especially true in the Texas area, and even more specifically around the San Marcos potential logistics center. And we found that there's also going to be synergies with the network that we had identified in Kennewick, Washington, and Jasper, Alabama, in connection with the two largest lumber areas of the U.S. with the Pacific Northwest and the Southeast. And further, there was other synergies that we could capitalize so that we could both use the upstream and the downstream capabilities of the logistics centers. We then, looking at the deeper into the financial analysis, we can see that San Marcos was a clear front runner with the 10-year MPV at nearly $100 million. The Kennewick, Washington MPV was lower than the Jasper, Alabama, but given the other factors in our analysis, and in particular, your commitment as BNSF to renewables, that we suggest pursuing that one next after San Marcos, and then going on to Jasper, Alabama later. And then in the next slide, we can see that we were able to also use the business analyst tools in ESRI in order to compare these potential markets further. Looking at the construction labor force, we see that that's also highly favorable in the San Marcos region, as well as a very significant population growth rate. Another analysis that we were able to perform in the business analyst tool was a suitability analysis. We first used a base case where our high weights were our net present value, our population growth rate, and our construction workforce, among the other factors we included, where San Marcos was a clear leader. We then wanted to see what the impact would be on given the relationship with the existing logistics centers. And we, in case B, used an inverse relationship. And in that relationship, San Marcos went down to a second tier, with Kennewick, Washington being the primary tier. And then we looked at the positive relationship, where San Marcos was, again, the clear leader. And we believe that this is the relationship that will actually happen, and that there won't be any cannibalization of market, but there will actually be greater synergies within the logistics centers within Texas, and also providing other opportunities to connect those logistics centers further towards the Gulf.
As you go to market, we thought about what opportunities there were to provide a value proposition to your customers to attract them to come to the logistics centers. To us, very important was sustainable renewable energies. And San Marcos, we wanted to capitalize on that as we met with customers. Definitely, we want that location and the Kennewick location to fully be powered by renewable energy. And we feel like that would be a great selling point for those customers, and it would help them as they come to be close to you at your logistics centers to also be fed by those renewable energies and help support their goals to be sustainable and renewable into the future. And by coming closer to you, it increases that synergy and those benefits. By reducing the middleman, the truck industry, bringing the customer on site at the logistics centers, you reduce the carbon emissions by 3 to 4 times by going straight to rail. And that's going to be a huge buy for them, especially if they have to come from 100 miles away to come to your center. I'm sure that will be a huge selling point. And also just being there, also working with you closely, that will be a huge benefit. A pain point that we identified was inventory management, and using AI and drones to help develop that. There's startups that use LiDAR. They can do inventory management using drones. You can look at aggregate piles or logging, or even within warehouses, look at RFID to track their inventory, and that can save them on labor costs. And together, you guys can better account for future needs and the current inventory. And also for drones, for AI and the Internet of Things, there's hazards that happen out there in the real world. Sometimes trains don't get to their destinations on time, and rerouting them is important. And customers, they want to know if there's going to be a delay. And so utilizing technology, AI, to tell them when they can expect to receive their products, and also helping you to reroute your path so that you can get it in the most optimal time. So costs and benefits to you. For them, they'll be able to save on labor on those inventory inspections. And also for you, you can use those drones to help you with your railway inspections as you've already invested in that. And also looking at load weights on trains and increasing safety. Your customers will be able to get real-time updates on schedule delays, and you'll be able to reroute your paths in the most effective way possible.
And we understand that time is of the essence. And with that in mind, we developed this implementation plan based on our cost analysis with the NPV, but also we try to find a solution that would get your logistics center running as fast as possible. So by our analysis and our implementation plan is to first start with acquiring the land and all the legal documentation, all the process you need to do. At month 3, we can see that you can start the site preparation with road accesses and also connecting the renewable and utilities for your tenants. For this analysis, for Texas specifically, as we mentioned, we're focused on residential and infrastructure. And then at month 6, that's the heavy development starting. So we anticipate that this is the most part of the development cost. The development part is about 90% of the whole investment cost. This is the warehouse building, the in-lot railing construction we need to do. And also for Texas specifically, we chose a location that is remotely based on our cost analysis. So that's also where we build the additional railing to get to the main lines of BNSF. And at month 14, the site is complete, the logistics center is ready and ready to run, right? So at this point, we decided we suggest that you can pilot some drone usage, as Scott was talking about, so you can have like a brand new facility and you can pilot that usage of drone to facilitate inventory management for your clients, so you can differentiate yourselves through technology. And we understand that this timeline is the best case scenario, right? And in our analysis, we performed a sensitivity analysis on NPV, depending on if we were to have any delays in construction. So if, for example, you were to invest all of this money, buy the land, build the facility, but for some reason you have to delay the operations and wait for a year or 2 or 3, each year that you have to wait, in our analysis, we estimated that you will lose about $20 million in your NPV. So that's a lot, but for Texas specifically, we anticipate a net present value of $100 million. So even if the worst case scenario happened, we could wait like 1, 2, or 3 years so you can start operating the business, you would still be profitable. So after 2 years, our plan is to use the same schedule for Texas, now go and build a logistics center at Washington and apply all the lessons learned, maybe even develop even further on the drone usage. And at year 4, start using the same schedule to develop the Alabama plant. And as I was talking about, like these risks involved with delay of construction, of development, we also analyzed potential risk factors for this particular project of the logistics centers. So I mentioned like external factors like COVID, maybe environmental issues that we cannot control. But there are some important factors. The risk of competition is always an important factor when you're making a move like this. So the case came as an opportunity because some of the competitors are making that move. So that's something important to account for, because maybe with the competition will come lower margins. You have to differentiate yourselves using technology based on our recommendations so you can become more competitive. The second risk factor is regulations overall, right? So different states, we talk about Texas, Washington, Alabama. So different states, they have different regulations. They might have like legal issues for lands that are bought remotely or close to urban centers, and even environmental issues. So some states, they're building like regulations to become more green. And that's one of the points why we're moving into Washington, but that might pose like a risk associated with these new regulations and policy that you have to comply. And the third risk we identify is the volatility of the market. So we're basing our revenue and recommendations on these growing markets. So residential, infrastructure, clean energy, but these are some estimates. So if you see a peak or a volatility in the years to come, so maybe you won't have enough capacity to fill that demand. So to wrap our presentation up, we saw that there was a big opportunity for BNSF to build this new logistics center and enjoy the synergies that they have, and also build upon the profitability of this opportunity. We anticipate that net present value of $100 million if we invest in Texas. That was one of our recommendations. Then move to Washington, then to Alabama, and also build on sustainability, continue being known for sustainable industry, and while also developing these new technologies to become more competitive, since you're part of the new entrants in these new logistics centers. So with that, we conclude our presentation. We really appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
All right, thank you. And Tony, why don't we start with you? You mentioned 6 of the locations have negative NPV. Do you have any supporting analysis for that?
Yes, we do. Marcus, would you like to speak to that?
Yes. So at first we developed like a revenue analysis using ESRI. And then we identify like potential sites based on that analysis on growing markets. But then we accounted for the cost, like the landing cost, especially the development cost. That was a huge chunk of the cost to implement these development sites. So we built these NPV tables. You can see all these different sites. And the only 4 sites that came out with a positive NPV were, as we mentioned, California, Texas, Washington, and Alabama. All the other sites came with very close to zero. Some of those, some were very, very negative, but that's all we did, like build this NPV table to do that.
Is there any assumptions that you made for this?
Yes, we used the cost tables. Well, Marcus built out cost tables using the data within the case as well as in the revenue and cost analysis tools that we were given. We stuck pretty closely to the information that we received there.
Right. Thanks.
Okay. And Alec, you had a question?
Same question as Tony. So they walked through their financials. I think I have my question answered.
All right, I think we have Greg next.
Yeah, how did you determine the industry weightings? I think it was on slide 7.
Sure. I believe that was the initial that I talked about. So we went through and analyzed a number of factors, and Alex will be able to speak a little bit more clearly here. Each one was fairly unique. One of note, though, was that in the environmental analysis, we did take into consideration legal or recent legislation that is promoting sustainable practices, specifically in California and in Washington, with their goals for 100% renewable energy by 2045. But Alex, if you want to speak a little bit more closely to how you ran those analyses, that'd be great.
Yeah, so there's really 2 different levels of weights that we looked at here. First, this kind of high level of each industry, and this was based off of the attractiveness of the market and some of that political aspects as well, and the growth. As you see, residential and agriculture are similar market size, but the growth level in residential is significantly higher, and so that weighted it up to the 30%. But then also in the next slide, we did individual weighting with different criteria for the industry scorecard. So as I mentioned, we did a different weight for the area within the 150-mile range than the 300-mile range. And then each of the different factors that we're able to analyze within ESRI, we applied a weight to that as well.
And to speak a little bit about our process, the revenue tool that we were given had a weighting criteria that we were able to utilize. And once we had kind of our weights based on that, we then fed it into the ESRI tool, and we were able to come out with this industry scorecard.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Mike next on his question.
All right, thank you. Towards the end of your presentation, you identified 3 risks, and one of those was cost of competition. Can you walk us through what you would propose to do as a hedge to that risk or a mitigation to that risk?
Marcus, do you want to take this one?
Yeah. So one thing that we tried to build upon was one of the challenges in the case mentions that we should use technology to kind of differentiate ourselves. So that's one of the things we look to try to identify that BNSF could build into. So for example, the drone usage in AI, you are already known for an industry that is innovative. So since you're working now on logistics centers, our recommendation is to bring the innovation into the logistics centers to differentiate yourselves from the competition. And also the location, that's an important part because BNSF also have a huge network. So if you're close to your network, then you can build synergy through your network and other logistics centers, that's also a differentiator.
And to speak a little bit more clearly to that, there's something called the network effect, where you want to increase the barrier to exit for your customers in a lot of cases. And these logistics centers offer an opportunity for you to invite your customers to come and build, their facilities closer to you and link themselves more closely with your network. Additionally, we recognize that BNSF has first mover advantage here. The more you have cost synergies that these 3PLs do not have. On the other hand, Union Pacific might. So you getting into these centers is really important. The geographic location, once there's a center like this in a geographic location, is easy for the market to become saturated. So you want to make sure to find those locations that will be most advantageous to you and to your clients.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Tony, you have a question.
You guys talked about doing a sensitivity analysis, which the impact of the delay and how it's going to impact timelines and close to an impact of $20 million. Could you explain a little bit more on that?
Sure, Marcus will take this one as well.
Yeah, so we try to identify like different risks. As I mentioned, like we understand that time is of the essence. Like we want to get the business up and running as fast as we can. But with COVID happening, all these crazy stuff happening that aren't in our control. So what we did was analyze what are the impacts on the NPV if the project is to be delayed. So one important thing that we identified is that for the overall cost of the development itself, building warehouse and railing, that's 90% of the cost, right? So if you are to buy a land and you have to delay the development, that's not a huge impact on your NPV because you're not accounting for the most part of your investment. That's still a good real estate investment, for example. But if you are to develop the land and then for some reason you can't start, so there's some new regulation, you have the build ready to run, but you can't. So that's the NPV analysis I did. Like if I am to delay operations for 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, on average, our NPV will be reduced by $20 million in Texas.
Thanks.
Okay, Greg, you have another question.
Yeah, on the technology slide, you had some specific cost savings. How did you arrive at those numbers?
Yeah, I'm going to let Scott speak to this.
Yeah, so the assumption was that you might have for a particular location for a single customer, you might have one individual that spends their time doing that. So we just estimated one individual's salary plus benefits, 100K. For the railway inspection, we figured that BNSF probably has a team that goes out and does those inspections, and per logistics location, figured that would save a handful of salaries. Have one person send out a drone, and it would save potentially $500,000, maybe maybe that might be a little conservative. And
so the savings were within the LC.
Yeah,
right.
Per year. Yep.
All right, thank you.
And per customer for the inventory inspection savings.
Okay, Tony.
Can you go to your slide 36 in appendix? It's one on LC to intermodal. Yeah, previous one.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
Yeah, we explain this a little bit more.
Sure. Alex, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, I can talk to it. So what this is showing is there's little purple connecting lines in there, and it's showing this is the existing intermodal network for BNSF, and the distance of the proposed logistics center, how far they are away. And so this is one of the potential challenges of the San Marcos and the Jasper, Alabama site, is that there is a further distance from existing intermodal and ability to kind of connect to the container shipping, commercial product shipping networks. And part of the additional infrastructure that is going to be required and that went into the analysis, in particular at San Marcos. But one thing to note here is that Kennewick, Washington is in a great position that there is an existing intermodal facility very close to the proposed facility.
And what's that facility name? The one that's near to Washington?
The Kennewick, Washington
Yep.
facility. What's the intermodal facility name?
Yeah.
I don't know the name of the facility,
But it's very
the particular name, but was able to identify one within 2 miles.
Thanks for explaining.
And additionally, we will note that there were restrictions placed in the case as to how much of the product mix could be intermodal. We would recommend, because this is BNSF's core business, that you would take advantage of up to that 20% at each of these sites. We did not include that in our analysis due to the restrictions in terms of information, but it's important to note that that is one of BNSF's core competencies as an industry leader.
Okay, any other questions from the judges? We do have a few minutes left. I'll go ahead and jump in on one. It's going back to the technology question you had before about the financial analysis. What I'd like to do is to talk about how well do you know that BNSF or the industry has been using a lot of these technologies. You talked about LADAR, artificial intelligence, remote devices. How well is that penetrated into this market? And would it be more of a streamlined approach because it has penetrated, or would it be more disruptive because it would be a relatively new technology usage?
From what it looked like, yeah, BNSF is already working with drones, looking at the news releases that BNSF has on their public website, that they use drones for maintenance and inspection. For the AI, it looks like the startups are relatively small, so it's potentially a greenfield in some of these spaces. There's found a handful of drone companies that are doing inventory inspection though, so they're might not specifically be for the train industry though. It's probably across the board. So there's probably opportunity there for BNSF. Didn't see any specifics of that being used in the train industry. The Internet of Things, yes, that and using AI, yeah, we know that BNSF has been using that, but still feel that that is an opportunity to capitalize on in your go-to-market strategy and bringing customers to your logistics centers.
And Alex might have a few more specifics on the LiDAR technology as well.
So I've seen some of the LiDAR being introduced into the largely the construction field, and I think still relatively new. I think the adoption is ramping up, and there are definitely opportunities to streamline and identify new ways to do it. And I think that it also in identifying where it's useful and where it's not, where you might want to have RFID detection and where you don't want to have to identify that. So there are some things to think about in definitely streamlining the process going forward.
Okay. We have what looks to be about a minute left. If there is a quick question from the judges. Alec, I saw you raise your hands a couple of times. I didn't know if you were trying to ask.
Oh, Dave, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, it is 4:19. I'm sure we're getting close to the 4:20 mark. So I would like to tell the team thank you very much and congratulations for being part of this competition and making it to the finals.
Thank you so much. It's been our privilege.